lawyer and a financial advisor walk into a bar.
Oh, and then what happens, Dave?
Well, the question comes up. Liquidation, administration, or insolvency? What does it all mean?
That's a lot of big words, and it all sounds very bad.
Hence why we've got you here as the lawyer. Get us out of the shit.
Then just, mate, to go regularly in the lawyer, and then you won't have to have your tooth pulled out regularly. So they're big, nasty topics, and I know that people sort of have a vague understanding of what insolvency means, or maybe what liquidation means, but not specific understanding. It is helpful to know the specifics, I think, especially if your business is struggling and you kind of know the options that are ahead of you. And some of them are quite positive. I know, it does sound doom and gloom, but going into liquidation often is not the end of your business life, and going into administration, receivership, all of that, it doesn't necessarily mean you're all over. It might just mean that you get you draw a line in the sand, you move on, and then after that line, all your debts are wiped, and you start again. So it can.
But also, I think as part of that, for some people, they kind of don't want to address. They don't want to. I don't want to get to that point. It's like no. Sometimes, by making that decision to either go into administration, is actually is a benefit to the business going forward, as opposed to trying to hang on to say no, I'm going to get all this covered off, and then you're actually in a worse situation.
Yeah, and in that time, often you're putting in money from your mortgage or whatever, your personal, and your husband or wife or your partner or whatever, you're putting their assets effectively at risk when perhaps they're not too happy about that, and if your business is heading downhill, then you're better off pulling the trigger early than kicking in money for years to struggle on and becoming depressed and upset and all of that, and also becoming in a worse position financially in a personal capacity rather than just in your business.
Well, especially if it can potentially leads to bankruptcy, which then puts you in a very different situation than if you've been appointed an administration, which is giving you that responsibility as a director. I've said, we've put our hands up, we've said, because you also don't want to be in a position where you're purchasing more stock knowing that you don't have the cash to pay for it.
And it can get you into trouble as well for insolvency.
Correct.
So before we get too far into it, let me just sort of break down the definitions, because they're tossed around a lot. And I think it's probably helpful if we just give a little short summary on what each of those kind of words mean. Insolvency is a broad term about where you don't have the money to pay your debts. So people, when they talk about insolvency, they mean, liquidation, receivership, all that stuff, all is under the umbrella term.
It's like a catch-all kind of phrase.
Insolvent means you can't pay your debts when they fall due. It's a general concept. Within that kind of broad umbrella, there's really two categories. One is personal and the other is company. So if you're dealing with a company, there's a set of terms, and if you're dealing personal, there's a set of terms. So company, the categories, if you like, are liquidation, administration, and receivership. Personal, the categories really are bankruptcy. Well, that's the only category, bankruptcy. So, kind of bankruptcy is the kind of personal equivalent of the liquidation of a company. So that's the kind of the categories of your liquidation means your company is all over, it's finished, and it's all its assets get sold and they get distributed accordingly. Any proceeds from the sale get distributed to creditors according to sort of certain rules. But if you liquidation, that's game over.
So this is so also as part of that mix. So the topic that we're talking about today is liquidation, administration, and insolvency.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and this is what people sometimes forget, if you've got multiple entities within your business structure, it may actually be quite appropriate as a way to manage your business to proactively liquidate a particular business or entity for the benefit of the other businesses. So it's not always, oh my God, we're going bad, I'm going into liquidation. They actually may be a very proactive decision that you make as a business to cap and close out a particular organisation as well. So it almost ring fences your risk management strategy and exposure.
Yeah, that's right. And certainly if you're a smart manager and you've identified that you've got three, say, business lines, and they might all be in three separate companies or three separate trusts or whatever, and one of the business lines is not profitable, the other two are, then closing down one and continuing with the other two might make a whole lot of sense. What often does happen though is there there's money flowing between the operators and group. And then and often what happens in practicality is the whole lot sort of collapse, the whole lot goes at the same time.
But you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and then it all kind of, you're like a dog chasing your tail.
Yeah, you get ahead of it. Sometimes you can stop and just identify the one that's not profitable, close it down, and keep the other ones profitable without Paul. But that's a huge issue that we see all the time in business life. People are, they're desperate to get paid on this side so they can pay that other guy on this side or buy that product to do that. And the whole thing just kind of hang on for many years, and often it gets slowly worse and worse. You get more and more stressed, when really if you'd pulled the trigger earlier, that you might have been in a better position. And I should say there's a lot of kind of negative press or negative feelings about liquidating an entity, and the reality is businesses fail all the time. Expected businesses fail all the time, and it's just part of a normal, healthy economy to have businesses go into liquidation. It's not necessarily a big crisis. Obviously, it can be, and I'm not suggesting if your business goes into liquidation, it isn't stressful, but it's just a reality that businesses start and they finish, and most businesses don't last more than 10, 20 years. Even very good businesses often, their life cycle is relatively short. So, so there's liquidation. So that means game over. And that can be voluntary or involuntary. So someone can bring an application to liquidate a company if they can't pay its debts, or you can do it yourself. You can decide, look, I'm going to put the company into liquidation. And if you do that, you hand over control. You're the director of the company, you hand over control to the liquidator, and you lose control of the company. And they have a role to play to make sure to sell off the assets and to pay out the creditors if they can. And potentially the liquidator can even sue you. So if you've done the wrong thing, you've taken money out of the company, improperly, like taken dividends out that you shouldn't have, or taken borrowed money from the company, just nabbed it out of the bank account, which people often do. Then the liquidator can potentially sue you to get that money back. So handing over to a liquidator does have risks associated, and if you're going to do it, you should get some advice before you.
But is it also? Yes, I understand from that point of view that if you've been, you had your fingers in the till in a respect that it was not appropriate. But it's also a way that a liquidation can also cap your risk as an individual because you have handed over to a third party to take over. So therefore, you, as I said, you put your hands up and say, we're not in a position to be able to manage it. As directors, we are making that commercial decision to close, so we're not operating a business that's outside of the rules of the game.
Right. And if you think you can't pay your debts and that's, an ongoing issue, obviously people have shortfalls and stuff, but if you can't pay your debts when they're due, then putting it into liquidation will rule a line in the sand. Any debt that you've incurred prior to that will be, generally speaking, you won't have to pay. So it's a huge benefit, right? You've got, $200,000 in creditors you can't pay. When you go into liquidation, you're no longer responsible for that debt, right? The liquidator then will sell the assets of the company, and maybe they'll pay all of the creditors, maybe they'll pay none of them. Whatever's available, they'll use to pay the creditors. You won't get that. But if there's not enough money to pay the creditors don't get paid.
So is that then when people say, do you take the first step of going into administration?
Yeah.
And then administration might be, again, director hands it over to the administrator. So they will function the business, but they will also then say, okay, we've got to close a few things or provide an offer to creditors. But it also then the worst case scenario might be we can't do much with this business as an administrator. The next step is to put it into liquidation.
Yes, that's right. So the next definition is administration, and administration is kind of an in-between step. So you can put your business, if you're not sure if you're going to go into liquidation, you're not sure if the business has a future, you can put it into administration, and it's very similar, but the administrator's job, and they're the same sort of person as a liquidator, they're an accountant who knows about this stuff. Their job is and you lose control of the company again, but their job is to assess the company and work out, is it worth trading on? Can they continue to trade the company if they jettison some debts and restructure or do whatever, or is the company fundamentally unprofitable, in which case they'll just put it into liquidation. So if you're not so sure, you can put it into administration, and if it actually goes well, you can bring it out of administration again and continue to trade.
And really, let's talk about a really high profile business that flies through the sky. Virgin went into administration. And then the administrators then managed to agree to get the various bondholders that had provided funding to the business to agree that they were getting X amount cents per dollar. And therefore they got the business back up and running, and it's still operating.
Yeah, so if there's kind of a one-off or unusual circumstance that has led to some debts you can't pay, it makes sense to put the company into administration, deal with those debts, and that might mean you don't pay them at all, or it might mean you pay a smaller portion.
Yep.
And why do the creditors agree to that? Well, they agree because they know if it goes into liquidation, they'll get X
Nothing.
or Y.
Yeah.
So the
Next to
common
nothing.
thing is what happens is you say, well, look, if I put the company into liquidation, here are the figures. If I put the company into liquidation, creditors get 5 cents in the dollar. So
Yep.
for every dollar they've given us, they get 5 cents. Not so good. But I'm going to give a couple of dollars myself. And so if I put into administration and you walk away from most of your debt, I'll give you 10 cents in the dollar or 20 cents in the dollar. And the creditors, generally speaking, will accept that because they say, well, better than what I would have got. And so although it's not great for creditors, and we can talk about the other side of this, there's another podcast. It's probably too big a topic, but what do you do if your clients, your customers go into liquidation? But just looking at your own business at the moment, you can do a deal, put some money in maybe from their mortgage, do a deal and deal with that one-off issue, and then move on and run the company profitably. But if the company's not profitable because just generally it's an unprofitable business, then probably liquidation's the right answer, and administration is just going to go straight into liquidation. But it does. Companies do get, and we're dealing with one right now. We're a creditor, and the company went into administration and then did a deal with all the creditors, including us, and then came out of administration, is now handed back to the directors, and off they go, continuing to run the company. So that's the kind of pathway. The final one.
So your exorbitant legal fees were just having to be brought back down to you're not traveling to Europe first class this year. You're not jumping on the plane and turning left. You've got to get on the plane and turn right because the fee's been so reduced.
Well, no, our client was a creditor, so we collected a whole bunch of what we owed them. And we did such a good job. It's millions, which but compared to the value they got.
Correct. It's all about value, isn't it?
Yeah. So then in the final category, which doesn't happen so often, it's really a banking thing, is receivership, which is where a liquidator administrator, an insolvency practitioner, is appointed over particular assets. So that can be, over a property or over a company or over what, and a bank will often have the right to appoint a receiver over a company, and their job is just to sell off that asset in order to collect their money, and then they might hand the company back, and that company then might go into liquidation or whatever. So
what was Ansett Airlines? That was for some of the more mature members of our audience. Ansett, some people may remember.
Beautiful for that memory.
Here we go.
Often it is driven by the banks, but they used to appoint a lot of receivers, but the banks have sort of fallen out of fashion now.
Well, I think that's also in the current climate. People are feeling, I think from a reputational situation, we've got a lot of the banks will say, no. And you see a lot of the marketing and promotion that they're putting out there. It's like, if you feel that you're getting, a bit tight or whatever, please make contact to us as a customer of the bank and let us work with you. They don't want to be seen to be in the position that they're coming in heavy-handed and, calling in other assets. So, for instance, if you've mortgaged your house to run your business, to then say, no, we need to sell that. And they're just – and I think that's a really strong message for a lot of people to understand is that, don't keep hoping that things will just turn around. Seek the advice from your accountant, lawyers, financial advisor, banks to say, can you give me a hand? Because it might be, as you said, you can put it into administration and then relaunch.
Right, yeah, and that does happen, often they go into administration and that's probably the right thing to do. But it's not all the end of the world necessarily. You can go into administration and continue and then run a profitable business. Or you can liquidate the business and then, maybe start a different business or the same business again. And again, that's another topic, phoenixing, when you're allowed to start a new business and rise from the ashes, when that's appropriate and when it's not. But certainly, if you're a builder and you're running a building company and it goes into liquidation, and then you go off and start another building company, there's nothing illegal about that. Right? You need to be able to work as a builder. That's your job. So you certainly can start up another company. There's sort of rules around it. But you can also, put a line up in the sand and say that stress is gone and I'm going to start again and learn the lessons perhaps that you have. And you can do that multiple times. That can be dodgy doing it multiple times. But
because then it becomes reputational damage.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it can be illegal if you really just go and nab the same clients and run the same business. But there are ways of doing that that's sort of legitimate. So yeah, there are three main corporate categories, and then with individuals, there's bankruptcy, which is similar to liquidation. So that's on an individual level. So sometimes you do have companies go into liquidation and the directors go bankrupt as well,
Yep.
because they might have given personal guarantees for the debts and all sorts of stuff. So often there's no money and they've spent it all. It's all very bad. But certainly one of the benefits of liquidation and receivership and administration is separating corporate from your personal. So you can stop running that unprofitable company, and still you still hold on to your personal assets. You still your husband and wife, family, whatever it is, can keep their assets. You keep your family home, and maybe you go and get a job. Decide business is not for you. Go get a job and earn an income. But isolating your business and corporate debts from your personal is a real key thing that everyone should do, so that the stress of running a business, which can be stressful and difficult, doesn't leak over into your personal life more than it has to.
Yeah. So then, if you're talking, so we've got corporate and personal. So you made reference to the personal side from a bankruptcy perspective.
Yeah.
So if an individual has been declared bankrupt,
is
there a time limit before that bankruptcy is lifted?
Yes. So it's 3 years at the moment. It might be in the process of being, someone will have to correct me, transferred into 2 years. Or it might even be 1 year. It's getting shorter. And the amount that you need, the debt that you need to force someone into bankruptcy, the debt is getting bigger. So it's actually getting, bankruptcy is getting more difficult to pursue, and it's getting more shorter for a shorter period. But bankruptcy is the same in the sense that if you can't pay your debts and it's all going very bad, bankruptcy, rule a line in the sand, no longer responsible for your debts. You might lose your personal assets. Maybe you've got no personal assets, but if you've got a house that might be sold, which would be that might have happened anyway to pay your debts. And you rule a line in the sand, and then you can sort of get on with your life. Maybe you're bankrupt for 1, 2, 3 years, and then come out of it again, and you can get on with your life. While you're bankrupt, you can still earn a living. There's protections for a certain amount of income, but if you earn squillions of dollars while you're bankrupt, then most of that gets nabbed by the trustee in bankruptcy, who's responsible for your affairs. But again, even bankruptcy is pretty grim because it's personal and might affect your partner or whatever. But it's not the end of the road. And people, they're very famous business people who've been bankrupt multiple times. I think Trump was bankrupt. Not that I'm endorsing that you want to follow in Trump's footsteps in any respect. But, people who are successful do go bankrupt, particularly in the US.
Yeah, probably more so in the US than here. I mean, people would turn around and say their preference is to understand. So, how many times have you failed whilst you're building this business?
Yeah.
Like, is this your third attempt? Oh, right. So, what did you learn through the other 2 times?
Yeah.
Like, it's not almost a scar. Whereas here, people it's almost not seen as a badge of honor. It's a badge of shame to be bankrupt. It's like, oh, you clearly can't run a good business. Like, well, no, the circumstances, kind of cards didn't fall, whatever the reason might be. Yeah. Sometimes it is out of your control.
Well, that's right. That's true. I mean, there is stuff that can happen that is completely, look at COVID's a great example. That nobody expected any of that to happen, and all the sensible. I was looking at buying an office through my super fund at the time that COVID hit, and in fact, I'd made an offer on an office, and it had got knocked back. And that was, yeah, well, exactly. So I would have had this office, just moved in, fitted it out, spent a whole bunch of money. Obviously been committed to the massive payments for the plush fancy office.
Yeah. See, lawyers.
Yeah, just marble. It was just marble as far as the eye could see. Empty marble. No computers. Don't need them. Yeah. So if that had happened and then COVID had hit, then buying an office seems like a pretty sensible thing to do.
Yep.
But we would have had to move out. It would have been empty. We couldn't have leased it. We probably couldn't have sold it. It would have put a lot of financial stress on me. I think I would have got through it. But certainly they're things that are just out of your control, and that does happen.
Yeah.
So I suppose the important lesson really is that if you can separate your personal and your business, then at least you can maybe liquidate your business and start a new one, but keep your personal so you don't have to go personally bankrupt. And that's often a piece around making sure you don't sign personal guarantees, or if you do, you understand what you've signed and get them.
Yeah, which is really hard. Those personal guarantees across so many things is always difficult.
Very common. But that's right.
But that also comes back to the importance as a business owner to keep adding proceeds to your super fund.
Right. Yeah.
Because creditors cannot access, your super fund, and so as a form of risk management, you want to be contributing on an ongoing basis. And I know a lot of people will argue with us on that and say, "Oh, but I need the cash for the for the business.
Yeah.
But if the business is generating enough cash, you should still be able to function that way and contribute, as a concessional contribution, so a tax-deductible contribution year on year, to continue to build it on that basis, purely from the fact that it's just a clever way to manage your business and manage your tax planning.
Yeah, well, you never get a better tax deduction than contributions to super, do you? I mean, you just pop it in super, and it's a much lower tax rate than you'd get anywhere else.
Absolutely.
Tax rate, which most business owners are.
Yep.
So that's a winner, and then it's money that you can then invest in if you do self-managed super, or if you don't. I mean, that's fine too.
Doesn't really matter.
Money for you.
Yep. So then when we talk about, so if we bring it back to the topic of liquidation, administration, or insolvency. Why? Because I know the issue for a lot of people is that you hear them talking about, well, it was discovered that they were trading whilst insolvent.
Oh, yeah. So that's tossed around a lot, yeah.
So that basically means you're ordering a service or a product with the clear knowledge that you do not have the proceeds in your bank account, or that you're not going to be able to purchase those. And that's a really important thing for business owners to understand, to be able to sign off that insolvency certificate that says, or the solvent certificate that says, no, if I'm ordering something, my numbers show me that I do have the cash to pay for stuff.
Yeah, and small business owners will know that every year they're required to sign a certificate of insolvency saying so every year saying that they're solvent. When you're a director of a company, you have a whole bunch of obligations to act in the best interest of the company and to not steal money from the company and to do the right thing for the company. And sometimes that gets a bit blurred because it might be, so you might be the sole owner of the company. So you go, well, it's my company, I can do what I like. And
it's my money.
Well, until a liquidator gets appointed, then suddenly a liquidator's looking at all your obligations. And one of the obligations is not to trade while insolvent. So what does that mean? It means, you're not allowed to incur a debt that you can't pay.
Correct.
It falls due, right? So it's a cash flow thing. You've got to, you might not be able to pay for it now, but it might not be due for 90 days.
Yes.
When it's due, not when you think you can get away with it. When it's due, if you know that if the company's insolvent and you know it, then any debt beyond that you incur at that time or beyond, you can be personally liable for. So if your company goes into liquidation and you say, I'm walking away from that couple $100,000 worth of creditors, no problemo. And then one of the creditors can actually sue you and say, well, no, you knew the company was insolvent or you should have known the company was insolvent.
Yep.
So you're personally, liable. Now, if you go bankrupt personally, then doesn't matter. But it's if you've got money personally and you've liquidated your company, then you can be responsible for that. So that's another, and that's often talked about but not often prosecuted. So there's actually not that much litigation around that area. So although people often throw it around, it probably doesn't actually come to pass that often. But still, it means that if you think you're in trouble, you should, putting the company into liquidation actually will limit your liability from then on. So if you're really worried, it's not a good idea to be really robbing Peter to pay Paul for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Just trying to hold on, because that whole period you could be trading while insolvent, and potentially then you eventually close down the company, and then they could sue you for insolvent trading for the debts you incurred during that period.
Yeah.
So it's just another reason that if you're concerned about solvency, you should get some advice and potentially liquidate the company if you're really worried about it. It's a pretty grey area, because what does it mean to know that you're insolvent? And sometimes you know that you can borrow some money, or you know that you're personally going to support the business or whatever. So it can be a difficult one, but certainly one of your director's duties is to avoid trading while insolvent. And
which goes back to the point of making sure you're across your financials,
right?
That you know what your cash position is. Don't just rely upon someone telling you or saying, oh, there's money in the bank account. It's like, no, but the bank account might have, $400,000 sitting in it, but your tax liabilities, payroll, superannuation, plus your creditors could be $600,000.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden,
early in your business life, and it sort of happened to me. You sort of go, hang on, I got all this cash. That's pretty good. Well, that's good. And then you go, hang on, 10% of it was GST. That's never mine.
Yep.
Some of it's salary. Some of it's, I've paid wages, but I haven't paid the
super.
The AYG tax or the super yet.
Yep.
It's all changing, but at the moment it's quarterly. So you actually, a lot of that money is not mine, but it looks like mine. So if you go and spend it, and you get yourself into real trouble,
Correct.
Which is how people get it becoming insolvent in the first place.
Yep.
And often a lot of that money, you need a fair bit of money sitting in your bank account just to meet your liabilities. And often people don't really across that themselves personally, and they leave it to their accountant. But their accountant might not be doing the work till the end of the year or the end.
Well, they might do it as an accrual basis and not a cash basis, and
Yeah,
so all of a sudden it's like, no, you've just, and there's a few book entries, and it's like, yeah, no, but where's the cash to pay the tax bill? What? What do you
yeah,
mean? No,
yeah.
I've spent that.
Can I
All
say
right.
the liquidations and well, liquidations are led by the tax office. The tax office is the number one, liquidator, number one creditor that sues people and winds people up.
Well, they want their money.
Yeah, that's right. And often people are effectively funding their business by borrowing from the tax office, which you cannot do. The tax office is not a bank.
Correct.
In a lot of ways, you should be paying the tax office first. Because they're the ones that got special powers. They can nab money out of your bank account. They can put black marks against your name. They can do all sorts of stuff. So pay the tax office and talk to your creditors. If you're having cash flow troubles, talk to your creditors and do a deal with them for better payment terms, or talk to your clients, customers, and get them to pay early. Well, that's all cash flow management, which I won't get bogged
That's a
down.
whole different topic, Alex, that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
That comes back to the setting up your bank account, especially as a small business, setting up your bank account structures. When you receive an invoice payment from someone, you park, 10, 15, 20% of that into a tax bank account, and it's allocated. You just know that when the tax bill comes in, you can pay it. That's the easiest way to deal with it, but that's a separate one.
It was never your cash in the first place.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got to wrap it up for this episode. So, any other little sort of snippets and words of wisdom?
I think it's something to be aware of, that liquidation is not the end of the world. That there's different liquidations, slightly different to receivership, slightly different to administration, slightly different to bankruptcy. They're all different things. Maybe someone like me thinks they're more different than they really are. They're all about going broke.
Yep.
But they're not the end of the line. If you sort of understand them and sometimes can use them to your advantage, and then you can get on with business and deal with problems. I suppose I just encourage people. I know there's a lot of stigma about it. I encourage people. People go into liquidation and can get on with life. If you're worried about the cash position of your business, and you're worried about this sort of stuff, then get some advice and act early.
Yep.
You might be able to restructure and avoid it altogether,
Yep.
and not need to worry about it. But the earlier the better. It's not one of the it's like the usual. If you stick your head in the sand, when you pull your head out, it's much worse than if you act early.
I couldn't agree more. Seek the advice earlier than later, and sometimes the result can be not as bad as you perhaps first thought.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then, thank you. As we close out our conversation today, I would like to thank Alex from Taurus Legal Management. He can be contacted via LinkedIn at Alex Martin or via the website tauruslawyers.com.au.
Thanks, Dave. And I'd like to thank David Murdoch, the wealth activist from Paxton Bridge. And he can be contacted at David Murdoch in LinkedIn or at paxtonbridge.com.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alex. Enjoyed that conversation, and we will chat next time.
Thanks,
Cheers.
team.